Hello, and welcome to the Second Chapter Variety Show, where we mix cosmic magic with a whole lot of business mastery. I'm your host, Hunter Louder, your friendly guide to business astrology, here to help you navigate your career's second act with the wisdom of the stars and innovative business strategies. Whether you're new to astrology or have been stargazing since day one, this podcast is your go-to for discovering who you truly are and aligning your business with your unique astrological blueprint. We're going to get real about what actions to take to build a perfect fit business. Each week, you can expect a mix of cosmic insights, practical business tips, and lots of laughter. Whether I'm chatting with guests who've embraced their own second chapters or diving into astro business wisdom, there's always something you can take away and apply to your own business. Welcome to the Second Chapter Society. Today I'm sitting down with Hayleigh Hayhurst, founder of Espresso Podcast Production, a full-service podcast agency that helps entrepreneurs and brands launch, grow, and manage podcasts. Hayleigh is very passionate about amplifying voices and turning passions into long-form content that can grow both the community and revenue for the business owner. In today's episode, we're talking all about podcasting, who it's for, why it's such a powerful tool, and how you can get started. If you've ever felt overwhelmed or unsure about podcasting, please stick around because Hayleigh has some amazing insights to share that will leave you feeling very confident to take the plunge. Plus, we've also got some exciting segments. I'll give Hayleigh a mini astrology reading, and then later on in the episode, we will solve a business problem that Hayleigh is facing using both modern business strategy and astrology. So let's get started. Welcome to the Second Chapter Society show, where we blend astrology with business strategy to help entrepreneurs like you create soul-aligned businesses. I'm Hunter Louder, your host and business astrologer, and I've helped countless entrepreneurs unlock their potential by aligning their businesses with the stars. Today's guest, Hayleigh Hayhurst, is the founder of Espresso Podcast Production, and she's here to talk to you about how podcasting can help you expand your brand and build a deeper connection with your audience. So welcome, Hayleigh.
Hi, Hunter. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks so much for having me on.
I feel like this is like a very meta conversation where Hayleigh did my podcast launch. Hayleigh does my podcast management. And I was on Hayleigh's podcast, I think like a year and a half ago, maybe, when I was really focusing more on like the operations side of my business and before I dove into like the business astrology. So it was like, oh, I love this idea. I love her vibe. I love what she does. And then I was like, hey, I want to start a podcast, but I want it to kind of be a little bit different than most podcasts. And so we connected and you were like, oh yeah, you can absolutely do that. And here we are.
Yes, here we are. No, I love working on your podcast. I love your energy, your vibe. And then also just what you're doing on the show is so different than some of my other clients. And it's just so fun and refreshing for me. So I love it.
I know. I was saying to you a little bit earlier, we actually had a little strategy session, and I was like, I don't want to do solo episodes. I find them super boring. So the only solo episodes that I'm going to put out there are like the Zodiac season, just informational. But I love talking to you. I love talking to guests. I love meeting people, hearing their stories. It's just like, I mean, it's a big part of what's in my astrology chart as well. So it definitely works out really nicely. So I'm super excited to have you on. And as I mentioned, normally I like to dive into a little bit of a mini reading. So to kind of let you know what I'm seeing in your chart with your big three, you know, your sun, your moon, and your rising. And then it also helps as we chat throughout the rest of the episode, we can kind of come back to those items that might pop up here or there as we are solving problems and chit-chatting. So you ready for that?
I am so ready.
All right, perfect. So I pulled up your chart, and you are a Taurus sun with your Taurus in the 8th house. And then you have a Virgo moon in the 12th house, and you also are a Libra rising. So I mentioned to you a little bit earlier, I'm also Libra rising. And I would be really curious before I even dive into the mini reading, like, do you feel connected to your Libra rising? Is it like, does it seem out of your grasp? Are you like, yeah, it's totally how I come across to people? Or like, what's your perception of that?
I think my Libra rising is probably what I'm most tapped into from my chart. I think that it does give me like the personality and like, I don't know, some people say like flirtiness, but I just think like being able to connect with people. And my sister, it's so funny. She's very into astrology. And whenever she tries to send a text to anyone, she's like, can you add your Libra spice to this? So I don't know. I think since I work in communications and like talk all the time, I think that my Libra rising does help with that.
Which is awesome. So Libra is, ruled by Venus, which so is Taurus. You have a Taurus sun, so you've definitely got a lot of Venus, which is all about your values. Of course, it's all about beauty like the finer things in life, resources, which could either be financial or just resources like talent, connections. And then Libra rules the house of partnerships and collaborations. So, I mean, you being a podcast manager and a podcast launcher, and then just in the short time we've worked together, you've connected me with like, I don't know, 5 different people. You're like, oh, you guys are going to be best friends. Like, talk to this person, go over here. I'm like, you are a natural connector for sure. So, I mean, I think you said you've been doing this about 4.5 years, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So I think you definitely are in like a great area for yourself. And I mean, I hope you would agree with that, that you've like, oh, this is my calling. This is what I should be doing with my life.
Yeah, definitely. I love what I do.
Awesome. That's super cool. So Sun and Taurus, like I said, are also ruled by Venus. So in the eighth house. And so the eighth house is that house of Scorpio, actually, for transformation and all the things that are taboo. So it's like you're very grounded and practical, is probably even how you see yourself, because your sun is kind of like how you shine. But you have this really deep need for like transformation. So I think even though you're very social and personable, like a Libra, it's not just for like surface level reasons. It's like you want to have these deep conversations, these interesting conversations. It's like, I don't want to have small talk. I don't care how many cats you have or where you're from. Like, I want to talk about the thing you've never talked to anybody else about before. Does that resonate with you at all?
Totally. And I think before I even do that, some people tell me, they're like, I don't know why I'm telling you this. I'm like, I don't know why you're telling me this either, but like, keep going, I guess. Like,
Yeah,
people do that to
absolutely.
me all the time. That's so
You're
funny.
like, this is for the free therapy that I'm offering you right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, within business, what you really can do is like continue to lean into those projects that are really giving you that growth, that transformation, like allowing you to, keep expanding. And I think podcasting is interesting too, because like most online business, online marketing, it's always changing, right?
Mhm.
So it's always transforming, it's always growing, there's always some new like trick or algorithm or software or philosophy that you can follow. So I think that keeps it very interesting for someone like you with that placement. And then you've got the Virgo moon in the 12th house. So Virgo moon, I actually have a Virgo moon as well. You know, it's pros and cons. It's like your emotions tend to be pretty even keel, like very organized, very structured, very practical. You love to be of service, like you're really going to feel emotionally fulfilled when you're of service to people, which makes sense because you're a service provider. So you're in that right area. But it's in the 12th house, which is like the house of rest and retreat. So you also are like really intuitive and enjoy working behind the scenes. So even though, again, Libra is super personable, you're out there chatting with everybody, but it's like I also enjoy being behind the computer and editing the podcast and like connecting people and thinking very deeply about my next step and what I'm going to do in my business. Does that resonate with you?
100%. Yes, definitely.
Awesome. And then we'll look at the Libra rising. So your rising side is always in your first house because it's the house of self and identity, and it's how people see you. And the reason I asked about it, like I said, I'm also Libra rising, and I've actually had a lot of trouble connecting with my Libra rising because part of my story is like I was super masculine, like CEO, go, 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 sell, 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 money, all that kind of stuff. And then I had a massive burnout. And I really think a part of my burnout was that I really wasn't tapped into my feminine energy at all. Like I was really unbalanced. And so I'm kind of like, okay, I'm trying to like get friendly with my Libra rising because when everybody describes me, they describe me as a Libra. And I'm like, no, I'm a spicy Gemini. Come on, like this is not who I am. So it's like I'm trying to come to terms with that. But for you, with the Libra rising, you naturally bring balance, harmony, beauty. You're amazing at making connections. We talked about earlier. You really make people feel like they're included, which is obviously why you're able to build such a strong, community around your business. So just keep doing that. Like keep diving into relationships, networking, connecting. And we were even talking earlier about a little bit of a strategy that after you have a podcast interview, you even send out emails saying, hey, let's get together again. When this wasn't like a one and done, this is something I would love to nurture this relationship for a long time. I think that's really a big part of your Libra rising.
Mm. Okay, well, I love that. I love that. That's amazing. I knew I did all these things for a reason.
I know. I think it's fun, like how it kind of reflected back to you because you're
Yeah.
like, oh, I think I do that, but then like, oh, someone else saw me do that. I know that I'm really doing it authentically.
Yeah.
Perfect. So without further ado, I would love to dive into, and now we've looked at kind of your astrological placements and how that really like puts you in a wonderful service provider, podcasting collaboration role. I would really love to hear your story about how I think you transitioned from like a background in journalism
Mhm.
and then you founded the Espresso podcast production. So I'd just love to hear that little journey.
Yeah, definitely. So I grew up in Las Vegas. That's where my family still lives. I lived there up until I moved here to Seattle about 4.5 years ago. So I'm 27 now. So I moved here when I was 20,
Yeah.
23. But so I started my business once I moved up here. My backstory is I graduated from college. I was doing journalism. I graduated in December of 2019, basically right into the pandemic, really no time to figure out what I was doing with my adult life, but that's
Right.
okay. And so when I was working in the past, I was an intern. I worked at companies like NPR. I was interning there. And then my latest, like my last internship before I moved up to Seattle was at UFC. So I was working in communications and I loved the laid back corporate vibe, but I did not love sitting at a desk. And so when I even before that, let's go back a little bit further, I had an internship with the city of Henderson, which is right next to Las Vegas. During that time, that was the most boring job I've ever had in my whole life. I was like a receptionist, but the door was locked and no one ever came in. So I don't know why I was there. Anyways, all I would do all day was listen to podcasts about freelance writing and entrepreneurship and all these things. And since I was in journalism, I really thought that I'd go into like a freelance writing type of job. But obviously, once I got hired at other places, I got a little distracted from that goal. And when I moved up to Seattle, had no job and was just kind of figuring everything out, those opportunities and what I learned from these podcasts I was listening to, like Being Boss, that was a big one I was listening to, really came to use. I never thought it would, but that's kind of where I first got that inspiration to run an online business. When I was in college, I did have a podcast with my friend. We had access to podcasting studios, so we just got together weekly, kind of had a fun conversation, and we're in a pretty niche topic, and so we learned how to market ourselves, do all the production. We were just doing everything ourselves. When I moved up to Seattle, that's when someone that I knew connected with me, and she was like, "Hey, I know you used to have this podcast for fun. I'm a business coach. My business is booming during the pandemic. Like, I no longer have time to manage my own podcast. Can I pay you and can you do this for me?" It was very low pay, but I really was unemployed and didn't know that podcast production was a job. So I was doing her podcast for about 2 months and she was like, "Hey, you're like really good at this. Can I connect you with other people? Like, do you want to grow this?" So her name is Ashley Maslow. She's a personal branding coach. She's actually my cousin's cousin, which is such a funny connection. So she was my first client I ever got, and she connected me with all these different people in the business world. And I grew my business off of referrals from her. And then I obviously found my own referrals. And then since it was the pandemic, I couldn't really do in person networking. But over the past year and a half, I've really gone strong into in person networking. And so continue to grow in different directions like that. But that's really the how I got to the second chapter of my life.
No, I love that. It's such a great pandemic story too, because it's like people talk about, oh, the pandemic hit, and then like I skyrocketed, like I boomed,
Yeah, right.
and I think it's such an interesting because obviously there's a lot of two sides to it. Some people just are horrible in so many ways, and then other people are like, oh, I found my true calling. Like I actually started to examine my life and say, what do I want to be doing with my life? Not
Mhm.
just like, oh, let me keep in this corporate position. I went to college for this. I got this job. Da 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 da. Like let me just follow like the quote unquote American dream kind of concept,
Yeah.
so it's, and I love what you said too. I didn't even know podcast production was a job when I had a massive burnout in corporate too. I was in hospitality. When I left, I was like, I don't know what I want to do with my life or when I grow up, but I know I don't want to have to work from any location specifically.
Mhm.
Like I want to be able to work from anywhere in the world. So I was like, I have to learn the online world. I have to learn how to apply my business skills for brick and mortar to the online world. And during that time, it was like a kid in a candy store of like, that's a job. That's a job. That's a job. Like a Pinterest manager. I'm like, what? Like you said, a real estate VA, like a very
Yeah.
specific, like core real estate agent. I'm like, that's a whole career is to learn how to be a real estate VA. And it's just like, it's almost like Brave New World, just all these options you didn't even know existed. And you're like, how am I going to pick what I want to be when what I want to be, I didn't even know was actually a thing. So it's very cool that you like kind of fell into it.
Yeah, yeah, and I
Mhm.
actually started off doing half podcast production, half virtual assisting work,
Okay.
and quickly learned virtual assistant work is not for me. This was during the time when, like, you could go into a Facebook group and find so many clients and make millions of dollars. And like that's so different than the world that we're in today for the online
Mhm.
world. But at that time, I was helping a lot of people grow their Facebook groups. So I think back to the community part, I liked that aspect, but I wasn't being able to be very creative. And so I stopped doing virtual assistant work pretty
Mhm.
early on and transitioned all into podcast management and production and strategy. And I love it.
That's awesome. Well, I was just thinking about, podcasting. I think for some people can be very intimidating. Like, oh, I'm going to talk. Well, so A, you got audio, which can be intimidating for some people. Now, your whole thing is video podcasting, right? It's like if you're going to podcast, do a video as
Yeah.
well. Audio is great, but video is really going to be the king or queen of social media, blogging, emails. Like it's everybody's visual. They want the visual, nowadays. So for somebody that's maybe a little nervous, like they really want to do a podcast, like, oh my God, I have so much I can share, or I love talking with people. I really want to help others. Because a lot of what podcasting is like, let me put my abilities and information out there to help other people, for free. And like, what would you tell them is kind of the key to podcasting, audio and video, and like overcoming your fears? Now, obviously, if they're terrified, don't overcome that fear. But if it's just like,
Right.
more, I don't know, people will see me and people will judge me. Like, do you have any suggestions as to how they can move past that?
Yeah, definitely. So I work all in the business space. So I work with businesses and brands. So all the advice I give is around that in mind. I mean, there's lifestyle podcasts and comedy and like true crime and news and all those things, but I specifically work with businesses and brands. And so, what I really recommend when anyone comes to me and they're nervous like that, step one, grab your phone. You can make a little voice memo to yourself and listen to it. And you might cringe, that's fine. A lot of people don't like their voice. I have some takes on that. I think everyone should love their voice because, like, that's yours and just feel
Even
empowered with it, right? But listen to yourself and really talk about something you're passionate about. So I know people always say, like, "What can you talk about for 30 minutes nonstop?" Okay, do it and record yourself, and I feel like you will feel so much more confident in what you're doing after you do that. If you're nervous to be on video, okay, then record a video of yourself doing it. Set your phone up and no one ever has to see it. Most likely, no one will ever see it. It's just you have to get your face on there, do your hair, makeup, whatever you wanna do, like, feel confident, like, in your looks, and then you'll be able to show up more confidently on the video, but really, I think it's kind of like exposure therapy, just do it more and just know no one ever has to see it. I know a lot of people will get started with doing Instagram stories or Facebook stories or whatever it is, and those delete after 24 hours. So maybe that's a good way to start. Just get on there for a minute, talk, but that's really what I would recommend if you're feeling that nervous. And then once you get past that, be a guest on someone's podcast. You don't have to go right into being a podcast host. You could be on podcasts like my podcast, Employee to Boss, or Hunter's podcast, or like anyone who has a good energy and is not going to really like, there's different types of interviewers, but be on a podcast and then you'll be like, I really am the expert. It all comes down to confidence, I think.
Mhm. No, I agree with you. And what you were saying reminded me of two things, actually. So with your voice, it's so funny because the way we hear our voice is not the way it sounds like when you record it.
Mhm.
And that scientifically it's because of like the way the ear bones and the bones of the skull, like the way the sound vibrates, it sounds different for us. So that's why we're like, oh, doesn't sound like me. I sound like, so I'd say everyone who knows you, that's how you sound.
Yeah.
That's not how you sound to yourself, but everyone who's ever met you. So if you're afraid to be on a podcast, you probably don't even want to talk to people because that's how you sound, period.
Right, right.
It is what it is. And then secondly, the other thing you said about with the podcast and the confidence, there's this concept in astrology. There's this kind of asteroid type planet called Chiron, which is like, it's the wounded healer. And so the idea there is like your greatest wound is also your greatest source of healing, not only yourself. And once you heal yourself, then you can heal others. So it's like, if I was scared, I was nervous, I lacked confidence, I'm going to go out there and do it because I know I can help people also have that confidence. So it's almost like if you bypass yourself a little bit, especially depending on your astrology, if you're like a service provider like you are, you really want to help other people, you're a coach, you're a healer. It's like, you know what? It's not about me. It's about them. I'm going to go do it to help them. I'm not going to worry about what I look like, what I sound like. And so sometimes that can help like kind of get over that hump if you're just like, I'm doing it for someone else, and
Mhm.
then do a few episodes, and then you're like, oh, this is fun. I'm enjoying this. And then you're fine at that point. Yeah.
Yeah.
That resonate with you?
Absolutely. I mean, I was so shy, and this surprises a lot of people. I was so
Mhm.
shy up until I was in college, like, it all through high school, but I had a class that was, like, the morning news, like, it was an elective, but I would do that, and it was like, I could talk in front of a camera, and it could go out to everyone at my school, but I could not stand up in front of a class where people are looking at me, like, I couldn't do it. So, I think that's, there's different ways. So even if you are nervous to get up in front of crowds, like, maybe podcasting is for you. You can edit it. You can do redos, like, it doesn't it like, Hunter, I always laugh because, like, no one knows what my clients' podcasts sound like until they hear it. Like, I
Mhm.
am the only one that hears it and the raw format, and I will do anything to clean it up, whatever it is.
You're
I
the
don't.
keeper of the secrets.
Right, right. So I'm like, "Don't be embarrassed, you can always make edits."
Oh, I love that. And I think like one of the things I say to my clients too is like, and if podcasting is not for you, then don't do podcasting.
Right.
Like, there's a million different ways to get your message out there. If you're like, I would really rather do this, then do that. That sounds great. If you're
Yep,
like, I would love to podcast, but here's what's holding me back, like try and examine that and kind of like you mentioned, baby step your way away from it because
absolutely.
it is a really powerful form of content for businesses. I mean, I would love to hear your perspective on that, like why either it's not even now. I mean, it's been like this for a while, but I'd say why now and video podcasting is so powerful for like especially small business owners.
Oh my gosh, yes. I honestly think that every small business should have a podcast. I truly do. Because what other way can you really nurture your audience week after week, get them in front of you? You're driving around with them, you're in their ears, they're inviting you into their time. What other platform is like that? TikTok is great, Instagram is great, having short form content is great, but it is short form. You can't
Mhm.
really get to the root of, those deep conversations. And even, going live on Instagram is great as well, but you have to, scroll through, and eventually it'll be, down there on your feed and people will have to go search for it. So, podcasting, for a couple different reasons, is great. One of them is because of the findability after you record. So, after you record, depending on, like, the SEO that you use and a couple different factors, like, people will find your episodes for years to come. I started my podcast, Employee to Boss, like, 2.5 years ago, and my first episodes still get listens. And so that's really a powerful part of podcasting, but I think that's really why it is so popular. Like I said, I got my start 7 years ago, and I've seen waves come and go, like, having a podcast, doing one every day, doing one once a month, like, just audio, and now the phase of video. There's been lots of transitions in this field, but back to your question, why video is so important. What people are really finding now is you can take that long form content and cut it down into short form. So instead of spending an hour, 2 hours a week recording TikToks and videos and all these things, you can just take your 1-hour podcast and, like, cut it up into, like, 5, 10 clips. Then those 10 clips you can use on TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube Shorts, and turn those 10 clips into like 40, 50, 60, depending on how many places you send it to. So then you're able to have all these different touch points with your audience. And so for businesses that I work with, like, this is a source of lead generation, and video is just a new way to get in front of new eyes.
I think that's what's cool about podcasting too. You mentioned, content repurposing, lead generation,
Mhm.
collaboration, expanding your network. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do with a podcast that, like you said, you can't necessarily do with social media, static posts or video posts or lives that really can be like multi-purpose. And I think for small business owners, since we, wear all the hats, it's like, what is the easiest way for me to get myself out there to the people who I can help and play the content game because and I'm not saying you have to do social media, but if you're okay with social media, it helps. If
Yeah.
you don't do social media at all, that's totally fine. It's just a different strategy. But if you're into that aspect of like, I'm going to record this podcast, it's going to be me and a guest. I'm going to promote this person. They're going to promote me. People are going to see both of us. It's just like that for me, I love the whole collaboration aspect of it, which I know you do as well. I love that you're meeting new people, you're bringing them into your world. Someone that maybe has listened to this other person now finds you because you had them on your show. And it just really makes things feel so connected, because I think the other thing about online business is it feels really lonely sometimes. Is like, oh, no one else is going through this. Like, no one else knows what I'm experiencing. I don't have anybody to talk to. And then you're like, oh, all these people know what I'm going through. Like, we're all
Yeah.
name community. I think that really helps a lot too.
Definitely, definitely, and that's actually why I started my podcast. I didn't really know anyone in the online space. Like I said, I
Mhm.
went straight from, college internships to an online business owner with, it wasn't that easy. There were definitely steps in between, but I didn't really have any connections online. So in my head, I was like, ooh, I could like trick people into having conversations with me if I invite them onto my podcast. And of course, my podcast has brought me so many cool opportunities like meeting you, Hunter. But it definitely makes a big difference when you want to have those deeper conversations with people. Having a platform to invite them on and have a conversation with you for is priceless.
Absolutely. So is there any other like cool thing that's coming down the pipeline in video podcasting, or anything else that you want to touch on before we dive into the next conversation?
Oh, yeah, I think, since we're talking about business, I see a lot of people take parts of their podcast or podcast episodes and actually put it into whatever offers they're having. So if they have a course, they can use their podcast episodes as like, listen to this as the next part of this course. Listen to this, I'm cutting out this video clip or whatever it might be, and you repurposing that into their content that they're teaching on. I've heard a lot of podcasters be like, this episode is part one of my course. So if you want the next parts, buy the course, things like that. So I think people are getting a lot more strategic with it, and private podcasts are becoming a thing slower than. I don't know if that's necessarily going to be a thing that takes off in the long run, but right now they are pretty popular. So there's a lot of opportunities for different ways you can use it rather than just having a podcast. It's a lot more than it
That
used to be.
subscription model is obviously becoming so huge with the TV and videos and music. Like, everything's a subscription. So it's like, if I like you, I'm going to subscribe to your private podcast to get
Mhm.
the extra tips and tricks that I was
Yeah,
not getting on the public one. So I think that
definitely.
exclusivity people really enjoy too, having access to that person, even though it's not like necessarily two ways. I think that's like a really positive thing for most entrepreneurs.
Definitely.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, that is a fantastic. I loved hearing your story. And actually, the only other thing that popped in my head is move from Vegas to Seattle. Is that like the exact opposite climate I think you
It
did?
really is, it really is. No, it was a transition, but I got a dog and he makes it all easy.
Oh, was there a number one reason why you picked Seattle?
I wanted to move just because I was after college, living at my mom's house was not the plan I had for myself, and so I had a friend up here, we went to high school together, and she needed a new roommate, and so she was like, "Hey," like, we've been best friends since high school, and she was like, "Could I convince you to move up here?" And I was like, "Probably," and so we're still best friends, and it's been great. So that's
Awesome.
why.
Well, that's a good story.
Yeah.
Perfect. So now we will roll on into what I like to call my vanilla ice segment, which is my corny 90s reference to if you got a problem, yo, I'll solve it, because I love solving problems, kind of like hot seat for businesses. And I think I asked you this before, and what you were struggling with in your business is that you really have a lot of ideas about like a new offer, but you can't seem to quite choose one and
Mhm.
kind of pin it down and put it out there into the world, which I'm sure many people can relate to, because when you're a business owner, like, you have so many ideas, you want to do all these things, and you're just one person. So it's like, how do I prioritize? How do I know what's right for me? Where do I put my energy? So is that still what you want to talk about today?
Yeah, I have a lot of ideas, I have a lot of concepts, I am just one person, I wanna hire, that's a whole 'nother thing,
Mhm.
maybe something in my chart is like, "Don't outsource," but, like, oh, that's a big part I wanna get into, but, yeah, that is, like, the main thing, like, how do I prioritize all
Mhm.
these things and, like, bring them to life?
Absolutely. Well, and just talking about your chart, I mean, depending on the problem, sometimes I'll be like, oh, here's the software, or here's what I'd recommend. But it's like, this is definitely like, who are you and what's holding you back from that? So, number one, talking about outsourcing and hiring people. So, what I like to look at is your descendant line, which is the opposite of your ascendant, like your rising sign. So your descendant can indicate either like ideal clients or mentors, or they kind of like fulfill something that you don't have. So yours is Aries. which is the opposite side of the chart from Libra. So having somebody that's like super energetic, like Aries are the doers. They're like, they really have a lot of energy, a lot of passion, a lot of fire, that they get stuff done. And they are definitely the ones that, like, if you're like, I want to launch something quickly, or I want to get it out there, like they would be the people. So if you know somebody that even you could brainstorm with and say, hey, I have these ideas, they would kind of be somebody to make it a little bit more like step one. Like, this is the first step for you to make it reality, kind of almost bring it out of your head and like into, into the world. So that could be a really helpful thing for you. And then the other thing I was looking at is that you've got your Venus in Gemini. So Venus is all about how you receive. So Geminis are like the ultimate multi-passionate. Like they want to do everything at the same time, learn everything, like go down every rabbit hole, like make all these connections. So with Venus and Gemini for you, I can see that's why you're like, oh, I have so many ideas.
Yeah.
And like, that's your values, like having so many ideas, being creative, creating things is very much a value of yours. I can see also how that can be overwhelming as well. And then the other thing I looked at is Virgo. So you've got, like I mentioned, your moon in Virgo, which is kind of like your emotions, but you also have Mars in Virgo. So Mars is all about how you take action. So for you, you need to take very structured, like organized, precise action. So if you have ideas that are swirling around your head, you're not going to be able to act on them until you literally like almost put pen to paper and say, like, outline this, or you type it up on a document or something, so that you can kind of bring it to life.
Yeah, definitely. That is how I do everything.
And then you also have your North Node in Virgo as well. So your North Node is like your purpose in life. So to find your purpose in life, you would do so through a really organized, structured way.
Mm,
And then
interesting.
Jupiter is how you expand. And your Jupiter is in Aquarius in the 5th house. So Aquarius is all about being kind of weird.
Mhm.
Aquarius, like not of their time. They're kind of very futuristic, very idealistic, very like revolutionary. So for you to expand in your business, for you to be lucky, for you to attract abundance, it's like you definitely want to do things a little bit differently than everybody else is doing them. But it's in the 5th house, which is the house ruled by Virgo. So you want to do it in a very organized way. So like your weirdness needs to be structured.
100%. 100%.
Yeah, that's me to a T. I know
Yeah.
that's what you see. Yeah. So as far as offers go, either pen to paper, document, step one, step two, step three, bullet points, all that kind of stuff is going to be the best way for you to really determine which offer and which idea you want to run with.
Mm. I love that. I love that. I know a lot of people talk about messy action. That's obviously not a skill that I've ever had, but wish I did, because messy action is great. But like you're saying, I didn't realize that that was all in my chart, but that is 100% how I am. Like it has to be broken down step by step,
Mhm.
or it's hard for me to wrap my head around things sometimes. I found, like, if I'm thinking of, like, I'm launching a new podcast the end of November of 2024. I'm very excited. But that, I mean, this is how I work with my clients, so it makes sense, but I'm like, I have to break it down into, like, launch strategy, and then what am I gonna do for the episodes, and, like, pre-recording and all of that. I can't think about it in my head. It has to be written out or I can't do it.
Yeah, and that's that Virgo side of you. So, with your Mars and North Node in Virgo, it's like Virgo can also have like a perfectionism thing where like they're like, I'm not putting out until it's perfect. So that's where I kind of like the shadow side of Virgo is like, yeah,
Yeah.
you said messy, messy is better than not doing it at all. And that you're like, that doesn't work for me. So it's like, I'm sure you've worked it out in some way where you're not like doing nothing. Cause obviously you've, built a business in 4.5 years, you moved to a different state. Like you take a lot of action, and those are very like spontaneous, kind of off the cuff things. And it's like, I'm sure you want to put order to them as soon as you possibly can. So it's almost like you can be spontaneous, but then put order to it. It's like that
Mhm.
would really help you balance those two things versus don't just think about it all the time. And I even find that writing something down helps because it's just like, okay, it's there. I'll return to it when I'm ready. I'm not going to forget it because that's always my concerns. I'm going to forget it. And then I might not return to it for years. Like, who
Yeah.
knows? It's like it's there when I am ready to dive into that. So do you think that'll help you with your problem of creating a new offer?
I love it. I love it. That's very validating. I like it. Thank you.
You're welcome. I know that's what I love about business astrology. That's kind of my focus is like the self-discovery aspect. So it's like either, oh my gosh, I knew that about myself. And it's very
Mhm.
validating, kind of that reflected back. or people know that about themselves or they don't like it about themselves. And they're like, no, like, okay, great. That's part of you. That's okay. You have that as part of you. Let's figure out how we can work around that and, make sure that that's not something that's holding you back. Is what the
Absolutely.
next thing there. Yeah.
Yeah. Early on in my business, I had a business coach who I gave her like all these ideas I wanted to do. And she was like, okay, just like put it out there and make it when someone buys it. And I
Absolutely.
was like, you want me to do what?
Do you want me to have a panic attack? I don't think so.
Literally. So
Yeah.
yeah, her and I just weren't meant to be working together, but it was a moment where I was like, people do that? Like that
People
what?
do that. And I feel like there's a happy medium there. It's like some
Yeah.
people love that, like they'll sell it and then create it. Great. Some people are like, I have to create the entire thing and then sell it. Now, obviously, there's pros and cons to both because if you create the entire thing and no one buys it, not cool. And then if you sell it, but then life happens and you don't have time to create it or whatever else, it's like, so can you do somewhere in the middle? Could you create like the first
Mhm.
module and then create the rest of the modules as people sign up or something? It's like, how can you kind of meet in the middle? I think is the important thing there.
Yeah. See, I can do that, but I can't go in with like nothing.
I know, because you're like, for me, my problem is I'm a Gemini sun. I would just change my mind. I'd be like, here's the program you bought. And they're like, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to do something else. So I'd like move
Right.
on to the next thing. It's like, you've got to do that. So Hayleigh, thank you so much. You've done such an awesome job of growing your podcast agency and really helping others find their voice, clients, repurposing content through podcasting. So I would highly recommend, as I mentioned before, if you're thinking about launching your own podcast or if you need someone to manage it for you, like work with Hayleigh. She's been amazing. If you like this podcast, yay. If you don't like this podcast, then whatever, because she's awesome. I don't want to hear about it. So. And then from my perspective, for those of you who are looking to align and grow your business using astrology, don't forget that I have my business blueprint quiz in the show notes below. So it's like a really fun, kind of insightful way to get some perspective on your own unique chart and some things you can do in business to move your business forward. So before we wrap up for today, I like to end on like a card pull. I mentioned to Hayleigh earlier that I have a little bit of a problem where I think I have like 30 something decks and I keep buying more. And so I figured I would justify that addiction with a card pull of my podcast episodes. So I picked a deck for you intuitively that I thought would match you and with your background in journalism and with our podcast
Ooh.
called the News Tarot. So they have actually totally changed up all the symbols and everything else. So I'll have to read from my little book on there. But I think for someone as creative as you are, auditorially, visually with the video, going from journalism, which is mostly writing, and you're covering all the creativity aspects. I was like, oh, this will be a good deck for her. So we'll see what a nice focus for you today. And then, of course, for the listeners, it's a great thing to be able to reflect upon as they go through their days. All right. So you got the Magician.
I like it.
Aren't they pretty? I love their
Very
cards.
cool. Yeah, that's really pretty art.
I know. Check out their interpretation. All right. The Magician. A potent message of your creator magic, powerful manifesting abilities, forging your reality, connecting to the four elements, creativity, and steering clear of manipulation and the misuse of power. Seeing truth versus illusion. So reaching up, the magician weaves and spins her reality into form with magic from the ethers and determination in hand. She wields all the potential of the cosmos. She reminds you that you too have all you need to bring your desires into form. The four elements support this journey. So she steps on the strings of her magic loom to bring its essence into reality. So what I take from that is what we just talked about. We have all these ideas. You have everything that you can possibly bring forward to make it into reality.
Yeah, I love that. I love that a lot. Oh, thanks, Hunter.
Perfect. You're very welcome. Thank you so much for being on the show today and for tolerating my coughing fits. I do appreciate that.
No worries. I feel bad. Hopefully you get to rest after this.
I know, absolutely. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Hayleigh, for being on today. It was a pleasure talking to you.
You too.
Thanks for hanging out with me today. I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to shoot me a message on TikTok or connect with me on YouTube. Links can be found below in the show notes. Until next time, keep building your business with mastery and a sprinkling of magic.